Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger with the Schiller Institute. Welcome to this week's webcast with Helga Zepp LaRouche, our founder and president. It's January 31st, 2019, and we're in the midst of an escalating coup effort that's being run against President Trump on any number of fronts. But I think we'll start with the one that was most prominent yesterday, which was this worldwide threat assessment presented by his intelligence team, the CIA Director Haspel, FBI Director Wray, and of course, National Director of Intelligence DNI Coats, where they seem to be contradicting Trump on every single concern of the strategic situation. So Helga, why don't we begin with that?
Yes, this is indeed the same cast of characters which were basically working with the British, colluding with British intelligence in the coup against Trump. And, I mean, if you think that the president of the United States is the one who sets policy, it is quite amazing that all of these heads of intelligence contradict him in every single initiative, especially the ones where Trump did something positive. For example, what DNI Coats emphasized not only, repeating this line that Russia and China are the mortal threats to U.S. interest and security, which happens one day before President Trump meets with Vice Premier Liu He in the context of the U.S.-China trade relations. So, it's really poisoning the environment. And then on every single initiative of Trump, like, he said that, there is no way how North Korea ever will denuclearize. Trump tweeted as a counter to that and said, no, time will tell, but that he's looking forward to the second summit with Kim Jong-un and so forth and so on. Then, on the question of ISIS is not defeated. Russia supposedly is already doing nothing else than planning to interfere in the 2020 election. China is representing a huge cyber threat, and on and on. And, I mean, it's really, let me just interject one reflection. Because the world is so absolutely tumultuous, many of our supporters and contacts basically expressed that it feels right now like a roller coaster. Now, if you think, when you were younger, maybe you're still young, and went with a roller coaster, the feeling you have is that at every point of your trip, the point of view changes completely, because one time you are up, you are down, you're in a turn, and it is very difficult to figure out what is the cohesion of this picture. And I think many people today have this acute feeling of a roller coaster, that the world is completely in disarray and that nothing makes sense. But if you leave aside all these seemingly confusing predicates, and you just concentrate on the fact that what we are experiencing right now is the collapsing liberal democracy system, the old paradigm of geopolitics, of trying to keep the world, in a geopolitical confrontation so that you can manipulate them. That has been the favorite game of the British Empire throughout its existence. And understand that, it is really the fight of the old paradigm trying to keep the world, in destabilization, versus the new paradigm of an emerging new system of international relations spearheaded by China and forming a completely new set of international relations in the context of the so-called Belt and Road Initiative or the new Silk Road. If you have that as a parameter, it is much easier to see how these things fall into place. And it is also very clear, that all the people who are attacking right now Russia and China as the biggest threat, I mean, these countries are not a threat right now. To the contrary, China has offered cooperation. China has offered a new state-to-state relation of major powers, including to the United States. And, it is really very important that people are not being confused. And I think the show was really given away by George Soros in Davos, where he said that China and Xi Jinping in particular are the biggest threat to his concept of the open society. And the open society is really the synonym for this excessive neoliberal model of economy, the values everything goes, the policy of regime change, of color revolution, everything we have seen in terms of the assault against the former, the countries of the former Soviet Union in Eastern Europe. And, that is really something you have to keep in mind. Think about Soros, and then you get a sense of how this whole thing works.
And you mentioned the provocations before the trade talks, the fact that Coats is singling out China for a special attack. Also, Christopher Wray from the FBI said that all of their offices in the United States are on alert to look for Chinese spying operations. Well, right on cue, as the Chinese and the American negotiators are meeting in Washington, they started yesterday, you have the Huawei investigation, the two sets of indictments coming down, one in Seattle, one in Brooklyn, with the charges being that this is a cell phone company that's preparing very sophisticated spying operations into the United States. I find that somewhat ironic coming from people connected to the National Security Agency who have, as Snowden pointed out, reams of data on every single phone call that's made. But Helga, this is the pattern, isn't it? When there are discussions, Trump met with Xi Jinping and Ms. Meng was arrested in Canada. The first meeting they had in Mar-a-Lago, you had the Syrian attack. This is part of the pattern of this coup operation.
Absolutely. And, I think that many people understand that, or they start to get the sense that there is such a coup. And, from our experience just in the last days, what really shook people up in the United States was the arrest and indictment of Roger Stone, an old friend of President Trump, because people somehow, realized that this is all orchestrated. And the fact that former CIA head Brennan came out on the same day saying many more names will be named, when in reality, even the Washington Post had to admit that in all of this Mueller investigation, that he has not produced one shred of evidence about Russian collusion, but that all the so-called crimes, including those, Manafort and Michael Cohen are being accused of, are so-called process crimes, which it means it has nothing to do with Russia or collusion. It is people lying in the Mueller investigation, things which were actually triggered by the Mueller investigation and not anything else. So I think people really start to see that there is this coup going on. And, it is really something, which has to stop. And the best way to stop it, as we discussed last week, is, sign the appeal that my husband should be exonerated by President Trump, because it is that apparatus which did the entire prosecution against him in the 80s. And this is the apparatus which did the cover-up of 9/11. And it is also the apparatus going after President Trump right now. So I would say, help us to make this appeal for the exoneration of my husband a very, very loud cry, because it helps people to focus on what is the problem and how it should be solved. And naturally, President Trump should also declassify all the documents in relation to Christopher Steele, the role of the British. And, there is actually a way of stopping this whole process, but it requires urgent action.
And one aspect of the Stone arrest was the heavy-handed deployment of FBI agents brandishing powerful weapons, wearing body armor. It was sending a chilling message, which is don't speak up against Mueller, don't defend President Trump, or this could be you next. And I think that's also how people see this as a coup. Now, talking about coups, we have some information on the operation being run in Venezuela with the support of people like Pence and Pompeo and Bolton. across both party lines. And Helga, this guy who's been chosen as the interim president, Guido, he seems to come right out of the typical mold of the Project Democracy color revolution operation.
Well, actually, he was a very unimportant middle-level person who, obviously has been groomed for a very long time by exactly this apparatus of the National Endowment of Democracy, USAID, the International Republican Institute, the Democratic Institute for International Affairs, I think it's called. In other words, that apparatus, which, these are just cutouts for the intelligence community, and they all are part of what you could call this global Soros regime change, color revolution apparatus. Now, this particular person, Juan Guaido, belonged in 2005 to a group of Venezuelan students who went to Serbia, and they participated in the Center for Nonviolent Action, I think Canvas is the short for it, which was an outgrowth of another organization called Otpor, which was that kind of color revolution apparatus, which finally was involved in the toppling of Milosevic. So, these are all operations which are known to Russia. They are known to many countries in the world. And you have right now a clear dividing line where, basically you had the countries which immediately endorsed this self-proclaimed interim president, claiming that Maduro did not win the election. The United States, Canada, Israel, and the Europeans basically all demanded, like Maas, the German foreign minister, went out of his way to say, I demand in 1 week Maduro has to declare early elections. While there was a whole number of other countries, namely Russia, China, Turkey, Mexico, Uruguay, and a couple of others, who said, no, the principle of the UN Charter applies. Who is the president and what is the election in Venezuela is entirely the matter of the Venezuelan people. And they are also demanding that the conflict should be settled with negotiations and not in any other way. So I think this is just another effort to have an entrapment of President Trump, because he was met with by Senator Rubio and some other one other senator and congressman from Florida. And it is really an effort to basically prevent any kind of cooperation, especially also in Latin America, where the Silk Road perspective does exist. And for example, the Mexican President Obrador wants to cooperate with President Trump on infrastructure investments in all of Central American countries as the way to stop the migrant question. Now, obviously, if you go in this direction, it is really trying to keep the continent away from that. And I agree with Pope Francis, not all the time, but in this point, that he said that the biggest fear he has is a bloodbath and civil war. And also China, in their comments, basically said that what could happen in the worst case is a repetition of what happened in Syria, namely many years of civil war, which obviously then would explode the whole Latin American continent. So I think it's really important that people basically look at the history and do not fall for the so-called picture as it is being portrayed on the surface of events. But the British Empire has been meddling in Venezuela in particular for a very long time. I mean, they had ties even to Hugo Chavez, which was related to the whole deal Chavez had with the FARC on the whole drug question. So, it is really a counter-gang intervention, which, people should not fall for. And There was a very useful article in a blog called Gray Zone Project by Dan Cohen and Max Blumenthal, going into the long history, and we will also from our publications produce some documentaries, which we have done in the past already, but we will update that to show that this is not what it seems to be, and for sure it's not an issue of democracy, and it is not just the question of oil, even that is being portrayed now as the big issue, but it is the same thing. It is the old paradigm trying to prevent a new paradigm from emerging. And as long as you keep that as a concept, it all falls into place much easier.
And part of the evidence for that is that among the supporters of the coup is the International Monetary Fund, and the so-called interim president has said he would bring them in. This is the pattern all the time in Latin America and Central America. It never works. The idea that the International Monetary Fund is concerned with the well-being of the people of Venezuela is a joke, and most people in the region know that. I think the other point you made, Helga, that's really important is the Chinese involvement in the Central America and in South America. And people should go to our website and take a look at that, because it's absolutely critical that it could fit perfectly with President Trump's discussions with López Obrador of Mexico for an infrastructure solution there. Now, you mentioned the sad state of Europe, the fact that the major European countries are supporting the coup. We see the continued mess here. There's more to say, I guess, on Brexit. Why don't we start with that? Because here you have inside the country which houses the City of London, a complete and total mess.
Yeah, it seems that there is no solution. There was a funny cartoon in one of the German papers this morning with two parakeets, one shouting and basically no border in Northern Ireland, and the other one negotiate, and they repeat this, basically the same line 10 times. I mean, there is no solution. There is no solution in this present combination, and as of now, the British Parliament has not agreed to extend the period beyond the 29th of March, but that may happen in the last moment. But I think that the condition of the financial system is so precarious that one cannot exclude that they will use the Brexit chaos to say it's all the Brexit, while in reality the whole banking system is bankrupt, not just the City of London. One sign of that is the fact that the Federal Reserve stopped tapering. In other words, they stopped their marginal incremental increase of interest rate by obviously realizing that if they would keep doing that, it would have the potential to blow out the whole system. Now that means that basically, the Fed stopped increasing the interest rate, while the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan, and even the Bank of China are all keeping essentially various forms of quantitative easing. And that shows you the system is in an absolutely precarious state. And again, only if we get the kind of programmatic proposals proposed by my husband already several years ago, namely, Glass-Steagall, global Glass-Steagall, banking separation, national bank in every country, an international credit system, a new Bretton Woods system, and then cooperating on a higher level in joint ventures of the Belt and Road Initiative in the development of Africa, Latin America, and various parts of Asia, Europe, and actually the United States. Only if you shift to such a policy can you avoid the danger of a crash, and that is not the question very far in the future.
Helga, a lot of people are suspicious of the Russians and Chinese because they say they're about to set up a new financial system. But from your discussions with people, your experience, are there people in Russia and China who understand the possibility or are aware of the possibility for this four-power arrangement and using that as the basis for a new Bretton Woods?
Well, I think this is a big question because, I mean, in general, I think the Chinese um, would, if depending how these trade negotiations today go with President Trump, and then there remains, I think, 1 month period to actually come to a final agreement. If that goes well, then I would say the Chinese in general tend to be more optimistic about changing the course of history. The Russians, in my experience, are very pessimistic. They look at the possible cancellation of the INF treaty. They look at all the other, very aggressive tones against Russia, and they think that there is a very small chance, if a chance at all, that the United States will change for many years to come. Now, I don't think that that is the final answer because, if we don't catapult the world on a different level, the Russians keep emphasizing almost, every day. For example, there was now a meeting of the 5 nuclear powers in Beijing, where Deputy Foreign Minister Ryabkov of Russia basically again pointed to the fact that the strategic dangers are increasing rapidly, and this is a very dangerous situation. So I think anybody in their right mind who is not risking or willing to risk the existence of the human species should really promote dialogue and cooperation rather than keep this chicken hawk game going, which could really blow up the whole human species. So I think the Russians need to see some signs that Americans and Europeans are willing to depart from this insane confrontation course to develop the hope that it can be changed. And that cannot come from Russia. It can only come from inside the West.
Well, there was an interesting statement from the Italian Senate President Cassoletti, who was in Russia and talked about the importance of the European-Russian relationship. At the same time, you have the continuation of the tour of Wang Yi, who was just had a meeting with Conte in Italy, where they talked about the synergy between Italy and China, which is a term I think that Gerasi used. So clearly there are efforts from some European countries, in particular Italy, to move in this direction.
Yes, I think this visit of Mrs. Cassoletti in the Russian Federation Council was very important. And she basically said, you cannot talk about European identity without Russia, and that the strategic balance that Russia is playing the most important in a very fragile strategic balance. And she called on the West, to basically move in this direction of cooperation. And in general, I think the Italian government, contrary to all the vicious attacks by the mainstream media against it, they are really showing the way. Wang Yi was just in Rome. He met with Prime Minister Conte, and they put out a joint, basically saying both things along the same lines, that the cooperation between China and Italy is of strategic importance, that it will involve cooperation in industry, agriculture, investments in all kinds of areas, and that they have a deep strategic partnership. I think this is very important because, Italy, for all the, bad things being said about it, it's right now the only country which is showing any sense of the major countries. Maybe Spain you can to a certain extent say, because they want to cooperate with the Belt and Road Initiative as well. So does Portugal. But if you look at the rest of Europe, it is a complete mess. Actually, I would like to mention the case of Germany. Germany is about to lose its identity and character as an industrial nation. Now, that has not yet sunk in with many people, because when you travel to other countries, mostly people still have the image of Germany as a key industrial power where many of the hidden champions are residing. That Germany has a rich culture and strong strong economy and so forth. But in reality, this is a coloss on clay feet because of the green policies. The exit from nuclear energy without having an alternative energy secured. Now you have this incredible bombardment and an agreement basically by the government to exit lignite latest by 2035 or 38. And there are some crazy people who have said, no, it must be 2030. Then you have the whole campaign to have, to don't allow diesel cars anymore to drive into major cities. So, this is leading to a situation where, first of all, this is enormously expensive. Already now, the energy prices for firms are twice that of France. The cost will be enormous. It will be 100 billion or maybe 200 billion in the next years for increased energy prices. And it's clear already now the energy intensive firms are going abroad. It is very clear that once you have a collapse of such jobs that many young people will immigrate because there will be nothing left in terms of science and technology in Germany. And then you will have a situation where the demographic curve will even get worse, and people will have a complete collapse of living standard, healthcare, and Germany as an industrial country is absolutely at risk. And all of these schemes to go in the direction of industry 4.0, to have the kind of energy autarky in your own house with solar cells and 3D printer in the basement, these crazy schemes which are being discussed will not correspond to the situation. And especially since the rest of the world, is moving, at least the countries working with China are going in a completely different direction. I can only say the condition of Germany is extremely critical. And there are many people right now saying, what is going on? Who is pushing all of this? So that even the Prime Minister of North Rhine-Westphalia, Laschet, said, well, it's good to care about the climate, but we can't drive it so far that people, basically, that we make the life of people so miserable that you will risk a yellow vest explosion also in Germany. So I think that is about to happen. It has only started in Stuttgart, but I think that below the surface, things are brewing in Germany.
And what's clear is that it's not just Germany, it's European-wide, it's still in the United States. And the people who are trying to impose this British imperial neoliberal system, which has failed miserably, are going to find more and more resistance. And the question is, will the resistance have leadership with solutions? And that's why the LaRouche 4 laws are so critical now. Helga, is there anything else you wanted to cover?
Yeah, I think, people should really reflect on, be unprejudiced. I can only say, if you look, for example, the Western model of liberal democracy, which is being hailed, that this is the best model. And well, look at what happens in France now, where Macron is deploying the French police with brutal, I think it's called sting bullets, which has small amounts of charges of TNT, and then little rubber bullets which can penetrate the skin. Many people have gotten it in the eye, got blind, or in the ear, became deaf. It's an extreme police brutality. Have you heard the European Union attack that? I have not seen any of that. They're very quick to attack police brutality in Africa or in Latin America, but they have not said a word about this. So much for Western values. And I think in a certain sense, the question of the common good, and it's now not time to go into this, but maybe we should do this in one of the next programs, because, the slanders against China, as they were articulated in this Arte documentary a couple of, I think, months ago, this is spreading, and it leads to a situation where, for example, the big firms are all in China, also from Germany, but a lot of the middle-level industry are, basically insecure because they only get what they get from the mass media, the think tanks, the EU. So they feel that they are being intimidated, and they really don't know how to judge this. And I think, the reality is that China has offered a model which is, for the first time, giving the developing countries the ability to overcome the underdevelopment. And it's also the only chance to stop the migration crisis. And, it is also offering a peaceful model of cooperation in the tradition of the Peace of Westphalia, where foreign policy is in the interest of the other. And, I think that people have to keep a cool head, because you have right now the most unbelievable information war, fake news, psychological warfare, black propaganda. And, as I said, this gives people the feeling of a roller coaster, which makes it very difficult to keep a look from the top. But you have to train your mind to do exactly that. Don't fall for this news and that news, but just look at the long arc of development, and then you will see, which countries and which governments are doing something for the common good, alleviating poverty, and in which countries the poverty, the drug epidemic, the youth violence are getting worse. And I can only advise people, read what the leaders say themselves. Read the speeches of Mrs. Merkel, of President Trump, of President Xi Jinping, of Putin. Read these speeches yourself and form your own judgment. So I can only appeal to you, read what my husband has been writing. He is a source of practically limitless wisdom. And, I again appeal to you, help us to increase the call for his exoneration. And let's build a world based on the beautiful ideas which he has proposed.
In keeping with your idea that we should have a discussion of the common good as a concept, there's a lot that you've written on that subject that's available on the Schiller Institute website. And I would urge people to dig into these articles and take a look at the idea and make it your purpose in life to ensure that governments act in the interests of the common good. So Helga, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes, till next week.